She jumped into the river to escape her abusive mate. The Alpha King was waiting on the other side. The night pressed down over the forest like a velvet shroud, thick and suffocating. The river roared below the cliffs, its silver waters cutting through the darkness like liquid fire. Elara ran, bare feet striking the cold earth, branches slapping her face and tearing at her cloak. Her heart pounded so violently that each beat seemed to echo through the trees. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps followed, deliberate, cruel, impossible to ignore. Her breath came in sharp, jagged gasps. She had tried to leave before, to slip away from the man she had once trusted, the one who called himself her mate. But tonight she had reached the edge of fear that could no longer be contained. She had no choice but to run. Memories of his anger flashed in her mind, the harsh words, the sudden cruelty, the nights spent hiding from the shadow of his temper. Each memory was a blade, cutting into her chest, reminding her of why she had to escape. She could not live like that anymore, not even one more day. The forest seemed endless, a maze of twisted trees and tangled roots. Every snapping twig sent her heart leaping into her throat. Somewhere deep in the shadows she imagined him following, smiling that cruel smile that had haunted her dreams. Ahead the river appeared, a wild torrent thrashing against the banks, silver in the pale moonlight. It roared like a living thing, threatening and alive. But beyond it lay safety, or so she hoped. Across the river the land rose sharply, cliffs shrouded in mist. Somewhere there, she sensed, someone watched, someone who could help. Elara paused at the edge of the riverbank, shivering, her body numb from cold and fear. She stared into the swirling water below, the current threatening to drag her into its depths. Her heart twisted. She was terrified, but more terrified of returning to him. The thought of being captured, of losing herself again, made her stomach turn. And then she jumped. The icy water engulfed her, stealing her breath and shocking her body. She struggled, letting the current pull her along, kicking and flailing against the cold that seemed to try and claim her. Her mind screamed with panic, but beneath that fear was a fragile thread of hope, the thought that perhaps on the other side there was freedom. The river seemed endless, a dark ribbon stretching into the night. But then, through the fog and the spray, she saw a shadow, a figure standing motionless on the opposite bank. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding even in stillness. His eyes glimmered with a strange intensity, like a wolf watching its prey. But not cruel at all. Observing, waiting. Elara's chest heaved as she reached the far bank, slipping onto the muddy shore. She collapsed, shivering violently, water soaking her cloak and hair. Her legs trembled beneath her, but her mind was alive with a fierce, burning gratitude. She had escaped. She had survived. The man stepped closer, his presence both terrifying and comforting. His movements were deliberate, measured, as if he had been expecting her all along. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, his form solid and unyielding, cloaked in darkness, yet somehow luminous in the moonlight.
"You shouldn't have come alone," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made her body shiver.
Elara looked up at him, fear mingling with something she couldn't quite name. Curiosity, something deep and unfamiliar that pricked at the edges of her terror.
Who are you?"
She whispered, her voice trembling. "I am Kale," he said simply, as if a name explained everything, but his eyes held more: power, sadness, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. "You ran from a shadow," he said, stepping closer, "and you fell into mine." She tried to scramble back, but her legs were weak, her energy spent from the river's current. Kale reached out, his hand hovering just above the ground near her shoulder. She flinched, expecting violence, but none came. Instead, warmth radiated from him, a quiet promise of protection. "Wild, who are you?" she asked again, more insistently. "Why are you here?" "I've been waiting," he replied, his gaze fixed on her, intense and unreadable. "For someone who needed to escape." Elara's mind spun. How could anyone have been waiting for her? How could anyone understand what it felt like to run, to be hunted, to feel the shadow of fear constantly pressing against your back. "Why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why care about me at all?" Cale said nothing for a moment. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the river and wet earth. Then, softly, almost like a confession, he said, "Because even in the darkest places, some souls shine brighter than the moon. Yours shines in spite of everything." Elara's chest tightened. She did not know whether to believe him. Her trust had been broken too many times, and yet something in his presence, in the way he looked at her, stirred a fragile hope. Perhaps she had not been abandoned entirely. Perhaps there was still someone in the world who could see her as more than fear and pain. She tried to rise, leaning against the muddy bank. I can't stay here," she said. "I don't know who you are, and I can't trust anyone right now." Cale knelt beside her, his presence overwhelming but steady. "Then do not trust me, not yet. But know this, your escape does not end at the river's edge. The danger you fled will follow you, and you are alone. Unless—" His gaze softened, and for the first time it seemed as if he allowed a hint of vulnerability to show. "Unless you let me help." Elara swallowed hard, her mind racing. To accept help was to place herself in another's hands, to risk surrendering control again. But the thought of facing her past mate alone, of returning to that life, made her stomach twist. I don't have a choice, do I?" she asked quietly. "No," Cale said simply. "Not if you wish to survive." For a moment the only sound was the river, thundering below the cliffs. The moon shone silver across the water, painting both of them in its cold light. And in that silence, Elara felt a strange and frightening pull toward him. He extended his hand, not commanding, not forcing, but offering. A lifeline. And with a trembling heart, she took it. Al helped her rise, and together they walked away from the riverbank. Each step was heavy with uncertainty, but each step was a step towards something new, toward safety, toward a life she had only dared to dream of. The forest around them whispered secrets of ancient magic, of curses unbroken, of shadows that lurked even where moonlight shone. Elara felt it in her bones. This was no ordinary man. He was something more, something beyond fear and cruelty, and somehow he had been waiting for her arrival. They reached a narrow path leading toward Kael's fortress, perched atop cliffs that overlooked the river. Its towers were black against the night sky, windows like eyes watching over the land. It was imposing, magnificent, and frightening all at once. Elara's heart thudded against her ribs as she gazed at it. She wanted to run, but she knew there was nowhere else to go. Kael's presence was steady at her side, his hand brushing hers, a silent reassurance. "You will be safe here," he said, voice low and calm. "For now, you need only rest." Elara nodded, though every nerve in her body screamed with tension. She had survived the river, but the sense of danger had not left her. It lingered like smoke in her chest, reminding her that escape was only the beginning. As they approached the fortress gates, a sudden rustle in the trees made her start. She spun, eyes wide, searching the shadows. "Do not fear," Cale murmured, his gaze sharp, scanning the darkness. "Not yet." "The night is ours, for now." Elara's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had fled one darkness only to step into another, more profound, more mysterious. And yet, she felt the stirrings of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The gates loomed before them, heavy and ancient, carved with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Cale reached out, pushing them open. The fortress interior was bathed in shadows and flickering torchlight. The walls were tall and cold, yet somehow alive, humming with old magic. "You may rest here," Cale said, "but know this, your past is not yet behind you. Whoever hunted you before may not forgive your escape." Elara swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of her cloak. She had escaped her mate, she had survived the river, and she had reached the edge of safety. But as Kale led her into the fortress, she could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a journey far darker, far deeper than she had ever imagined. And in the silence, the Alpha King's gaze followed her, sharp and unwavering. He had been waiting for this moment, for her moment, and now that it had come, he would not let her slip away. The fortress loomed like a sentinel in the night, its dark stone walls stretching high above the cliffs. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and ancient wood, of moss and forgotten magic. Torches flickered along narrow hallways, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Alara followed Kale silently, her wet cloak clinging to her body, her teeth chattering from the cold. Every step echoed against the stone, reminding her that she was far from the river and far from safety. Kale moved with a quiet authority, each stride purposeful, yet never harsh. His presence was like gravity, impossible to ignore, impossible to resist. Elara's heart beat erratically, a mixture of fear and awe. She had fled from a cruel mate, from anger and violence, yet she could not help but feel that she had stepped into another kind of danger here, one that was both thrilling and terrifying. "This way," Kale said, his voice low, controlled. They entered a chamber large enough to hold dozens, yet empty and silent, lit only by a single fire that cast golden flickers across the stone floor. "You will rest here," he said. "It is safe." Elara glanced around. The room was sparse, with only a simple bed and a table carved from dark wood. She felt a twinge of discomfort at the emptiness. It was not home, and yet it was refuge. Somewhere deep inside she felt the fragile stirrings of relief. Perhaps, for the first time in months, she could breathe without fear pressing down on her chest. Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I cannot stay long. I must find a way to leave to—" "You cannot leave," Kale interrupted, his voice firm but not cruel. He stepped closer, and the firelight glinted off his sharp features. "Not yet. Your mate, he will not forgive your escape. He will hunt you. And if he finds you, he will not hesitate." Hilara's stomach twisted. She had hoped foolishly that the river had ended her pursuit. But Kale's words reminded her that freedom was never so simple. "Then, what am I to do?" she asked, desperation seeping into her voice. Kale's eyes softened slightly, a rare crack in the armor of authority that surrounded him. "You stay, for now, until he can no longer reach you, until you are safe." "I will keep you here, but you must follow my rules." Elara bristled. "Rules," she echoed, her voice sharpened with the instinct that had kept her alive for so long. "I fled from one set of rules that only brought pain. I will not trade one cage for another." Kale tilted his head, regarding her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "This is not a cage," he said. "This is protection. You have strength, Elara. I see it. But even the strongest cannot outrun all shadows alone." She clenched her fists, struggling with the truth of his words. He was right. She had survived the river, but her past mate would not forgive her escape. She could try to run again, but she knew deep in her bones that she would not survive another chase. And yet the idea of submitting to someone else's control, even for safety, sparked a deep unease within her. Kale seemed to sense her hesitation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a quiet, commanding murmur. "Trust is not demanded. It is earned. You will see in time whether I am friend or something else. But for tonight, you are under my protection." Elara swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to protest, to resist, yet the cold and exhaustion made her falter. Perhaps she had no choice. "I will stay," she said finally, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue, "but only until I am safe." Kale nodded once, a sharp motion that felt almost ceremonial. "Then it is decided. For now, rest. Tomorrow we speak of the path ahead." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, drawing her knees close, while Kale remained standing, watching. She could feel his eyes on her, unblinking, and she wondered if he saw her fear, or if he saw something more, something she herself did not understand. Sleep came fitfully, a series of restless dreams that tugged at memories of the river, the chase, and the man she had fled. She saw flashes of Cale in her dreams, standing at the edge of the water, tall and commanding, his eyes filled with a mix of judgment and curiosity. It was unsettling, yet oddly comforting, as if his presence had become a tether to reality. When she awoke, the first light of dawn crept through the narrow windows. The fortress was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of stone and smoke. Cale was already awake, standing by the window, gazing out over the cliffs. His profile was sharp against the pale light, regal and untouchable, yet the tension in his shoulders betrayed a burden she could not name. "You awake?" he asked, his voice even, controlled. "I am," she replied softly, trying to steady her voice. "Where? Where are we exactly?" "Above the river," he said. "The fortress has stood for centuries, watching over these lands. Few dare approach, and fewer survive the paths that lead here. You are safe here, for now." Elara's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where mist clung to the cliffs like fingers. "And if he comes?" she whispered. Cale turned, his expression unreadable. "Then we will meet him. Together." The words sent a shiver through her. Together. She had spent so long alone, relying only on herself, trusting only her own strength. And yet, there was a strange, dangerous comfort in the thought that she was not alone now. That someone as powerful as Cale would stand beside her. The day passed in a strange mixture of quiet and unease. Cale introduced her to the fortress, its libraries filled with ancient texts, halls lined with statues of long-dead kings, gardens hidden in shadowed courtyards. Everything was magnificent, but the grandeur only reminded Elara of how far from the world she had fled. They walked through the gardens in silence, the mist curling around their feet. Cale's presence was constant, a shadow at her side that was both protective and oppressive. He spoke little, yet his words carried weight. Each glance, each gesture, seemed to hold meaning beyond the immediate moment. "Elara," he said finally, breaking the silence. "You have courage, but courage alone will not save you. You must understand the strength you carry, inside and in me." She looked up at him, startled. "What do you mean?" "There are forces here, ancient and dark, that do not forgive weakness," Cale explained. "You survived the river, but you will face more than water. Shadows, curses, old grievances. Your mate is not the only danger." Elara's stomach twisted. She had thought survival was simple. Flee, escape, hide. But Cale's words reminded her that the world was far more dangerous than she had imagined. And she was not prepared for it. Yet, despite the fear, there was something in Cale's gaze that drew her in. A promise, perhaps, that she was not alone. That someone could stand beside her in the darkness. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise, a rustling from the edge of the garden, sharp and deliberate. Both froze. Cale's eyes narrowed, and he stepped in front of her, moving with the fluid precision of a predator. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly. Elara's heart pounded as she watched him move toward the shadows. From the darkness, a figure emerged, an assassin, cloaked and silent, eyes glinting with malice. Elara's stomach dropped. Her past had found her. Cale did not hesitate. With a swift motion, he disarmed the man, his movements precise, controlled, and terrifying in their efficiency. The assassin fell unconscious, and Cale stood over him, breathing steadily, unshaken. Elara stared, wide-eyed, unable to speak. Fear, awe, and something else, a strange fascination, flooded her. He had saved her, yes, but in doing so, he had revealed a part of himself that was both dangerous and magnificent. "You see," Cale said softly, turning to her, "the world is not kind, and you cannot survive alone." Elara nodded, swallowing hard. The truth of his words pressed against her chest, heavy and unavoidable. She had fled one danger only to step into another, more profound, more complex. And yet, she felt the fragile stirrings of trust forming. Perhaps this man, This Alpha King could be more than a protector. Perhaps he could be a guide, a shield, even something else she dared not name. The day faded into night once more, and as Alara settled into the fortress, exhaustion overtaking her, she realized that her journey had only begun. The river had brought her to safety, but safety was fragile, and danger lingered just beyond the walls. The fortress seemed alive with secrets. Its walls whispered of kings long dead and queens lost to betrayal, of battles fought and curses never broken. Alara wandered its corridors with caution, her senses alert to every sound: the distant drip of water, the rustle of leaves through open windows, the soft echo of her own steps. She had escaped her past mate, but here, in Kale's domain, she felt that danger lingered in a different form, one that was silent, yet no less potent. Kale watched her from a distance, as if guarding her not only from intruders, but from herself. His presence was constant, like a shadow that moved in sync with her. She had learned that in this fortress, nothing was accidental. Every room, every hallway, every silent glance had purpose. And she was beginning to realize that Kale himself was a man shaped by both purpose and pain. "You've wandered far enough for today," Kale said softly, stepping into the library where she had been examining a shelf of ancient texts. The room smelled of old parchment and candle wax, heavy with the weight of history.
Alara glanced up at him, her eyes bright with curiosity.
"I wanted to understand," she said. "I want to know what kind of place this is, and who you are." Kale's eyes softened just for a moment. "Knowledge is a double-edged sword," he said. "The more you learn, the more you see what has been lost and what must be protected. There is a curse on this kingdom, Alara. One that has haunted my family for generations."
Alara frowned, turning back to the shelf.
"A curse?" Kale nodded, moving closer. "It is old. My ancestors sought power and control, and in doing so, they angered forces beyond their understanding. Rivers ran black, shadows stretched further than they should, and the heirs of my blood were never able to produce successors. The land itself suffers." Elara's heart tightened. She had fled one cruel man only to step into the world of another, a world where even kings were chained by fate. And yet, Kale's tone was not bitter. It was resigned, almost sorrowful. "And you think I can help?" she asked, uncertain. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "But there is something about you, something in your courage, your spirit, that may change the balance. You survived the river when others would have drowned. You faced fear head-on. That strength, it cannot be ignored." Alara swallowed, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. It was strange, unsettling, yet a part of her felt pride, not the kind born from triumph over others, but from surviving herself. "And if I am not enough?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Then we will endure together," Kale said, placing a hand near hers, but not touching. "You are not alone, Alara. You will not face this world alone again." A flutter of warmth stirred in her chest, though she tried to ignore it. She had spent so long fearing others, trusting no one, that the idea of relying on someone, even someone as formidable as KL, felt dangerous. Yet she could not deny the pull of his presence. It anchored her, even as it unsettled her. The days that followed were filled with lessons about the fortress, its magic, and the dangers that lurked beyond its walls. Giles showed her the hidden gardens, where herbs that could heal or harm grew in equal abundance. He guided her through the library, where scrolls described creatures of shadow and light, of curses woven into the very fabric of the land. One afternoon, they walked along the cliffs overlooking the river, the wind tugging at their cloaks. The water below shimmered silver, reflecting the sun like a mirror. Alara watched it, fascinated by the beauty and the danger all at once. "Do you ever fear the river?" she asked, turning to Kale. "Always," he admitted. "It has taken much from me. It has seen what I have lost and reminds me of what I cannot reclaim. But it has also brought new beginnings." Alara looked at him, surprised by the hint of vulnerability. "New beginnings?" "Yes," Kale said, his gaze distant. Even kings are not immune to second chances. Even those burdened with curses may find light in unexpected places. Her heart stirred at his words. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she could begin again. That perhaps, in this strange, dark fortress, there was a place for her, not as a victim, but as someone who had endured and survived. That night, as the moon rose high, casting silver shadows across the fortress, Kale showed her the heart of the curse, a hidden chamber, deep beneath the stone floors, where the walls were etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. In the center, a pool of water shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not only their faces but faint images of the past. The curse is older than memory, Kale said, kneeling beside the pool. It feeds on fear, on weakness, on despair. Those who succumb are trapped, unable to change the fate written for them. Alara leaned closer, her reflection wavering in the water. She saw not only herself, but the fear that had driven her to the river, the pain she had carried for so long. And beneath it all, a small spark, courage, stubborn and bright. "Can it be broken?" she asked. Kale's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Perhaps, but it requires more than strength. It requires courage and trust and willingness to face the darkest parts of oneself." She swallowed, uncertainty pressing against her. Could she face the darkness? Could she trust anyone? Not after all she had endured? And yet, standing beside Kale, she felt a strange conviction. Perhaps she could. Perhaps this was what she had been running toward, not away from. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew in subtle, quiet ways. Kale taught her not only the history of his kingdom, but also its ways, how to read the stars for omens, how to sense the currents of magic in the air, how to listen to the whispers of the forests. And in return, Alara shared fragments of her own past, her dreams. Slowly, trust took root. One evening they walked through the moonlit gardens, their hands brushing occasionally, the contact fleeting but electric. Alara's heart raced at the simple touch, and she quickly looked away, trying to ignore the fluttering warmth in her chest. Kale, for his part, seemed equally aware, but restrained, careful not to overstep boundaries that were still fragile. "You carry pain," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the still night air. "It shapes you, guides you, but it does not define you." Alara's eyes filled with tears she had long denied. "I don't know how to let it go," she whispered. "How to stop being afraid." Kale reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, his fingers lingering near her cheek. "You do not need to let it go all at once," he said softly. "Courage is not absence of fear, Alara. Courage is moving forward despite it." The simplicity of his words struck her. For so long she had believed survival was about fleeing, about hiding. But perhaps courage was something more profound, something that required trust, even in the darkest places. Their moment was broken by a sudden sound. A horn, distant but clear, carried on the wind. Both froze. Kale's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. Alara felt her stomach drop. The past had found a way to reach her, and this time it was no longer a whisper. "They are coming," Kale said quietly. His voice carried no fear, only resolve. "And this time, they will not be stopped by rivers or walls." Alara's heart pounded. She had survived the river, the escape, the fortress, but the threat of her past mate's reach was still real, still alive. And now, it was closing in. Kale stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, offering silent reassurance. "You will not face them alone," he said. "Together, we will confront what comes. But you must be ready. The trials ahead will test more than your body. They will test your heart, your spirit, and your courage." Alara swallowed hard, her fear mingling with something new. Determination. She had fled, yes, but she would no longer be simply running. She would stand, and perhaps in the process she would discover a strength she had never known, and a bond with a man whose power and pain mirrored her own. The fortress walls seemed to hum with anticipation, the shadows alive with old magic. Elara realized with a shiver that her escape had brought her here, not to an end, but to the beginning of a far greater journey, one that would test everything she believed about herself, about courage, and about trust. And in the stillness of the night, Cale's gaze lingered on her, intense and unwavering. He had been waiting for this moment for far longer than she could imagine. Now, with the past closing in and the curse still looming, there would be no turning back. The fortress stirred with tension. The walls that had offered safety now seemed alive with expectation, as if the stones themselves knew the danger was close. Outside, the wind howled through the cliffs, carrying whispers of the river and the forests beyond. Elara stood by the window of the high tower, her hands clutching the ledge as her heart pounded with fear and anticipation. The letter from her former mate still burned with dread in her mind. He was coming. Cale entered silently, his presence a calm in the storm of her thoughts. His gaze swept over her, steady, commanding, yet gentle. "He has found the path to you," he said quietly. "We cannot wait any longer." Elara swallowed, fear twisting her stomach. I am ready," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. She had run, she had hidden, and she had survived the river, the chase, and the shadows of her past. But this confrontation, the one she could no longer escape, filled her with a new kind of fear. Cale placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his eyes locking with hers. "Courage is not absence of fear," he said. "It is action in spite of it. Together, we will face what comes." The hour passed quickly. Cale had rallied the fortress guards, prepared the hidden chambers with wards and protective enchantments, and readied himself for the confrontation. Elara moved beside him, not as a burden to be protected, but as a partner, her own courage steeled by weeks of survival, learning, and growing trust. At last, the shadowed figure approached, her former mate no longer able to hunt in secrecy. He moved through the forest with a small group of followers, their footsteps quiet, precise. Yet the fortress was ready, its defenses set by Cale's keen mind and supernatural insight. The confrontation began in the outer courtyard, under the cover of night. Torches flickered along the walls, casting long shadows over the figures below. Cale's presence was commanding, radiating authority and power. Elara stood beside him, her chest tight with fear but her resolve firm. "You cannot stop me," her former mate called, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You belong to me. I belong to no one," Elara said, her voice clear and strong. "I am free." Cale's gaze softened as he watched her speak. There was no fear in her voice, only determination. And in that moment he saw not only courage but the fire that had drawn him to her from the riverbank. The fight began swiftly. Cale moved with precision, disarming and neutralizing her former mate's followers with a controlled, almost graceful force. Elara watched, fear mingling with awe, but when her former mate lunged toward her, she did not flinch. She remembered the river, the escape, the lessons Cale had taught her about courage, about facing fear. She stepped aside just in time, letting the momentum carry him past, and Cale intercepted with calculated force. The man faltered, and in that moment, Elara seized her chance. She ran to the edge of the courtyard, shouting for the guards to seize him. The confrontation ended swiftly, decisively. When silence returned, broken only by the wind and the distant river, Elara sank to her knees, exhausted and trembling. Cale knelt beside her, steadying her with gentle hands. "You faced the darkness and did not break," he said. "You have strength far greater than you know." Tears pricked at her eyes, not from fear now, but from relief and something deeper. Pride, perhaps, and the recognition that she had survived not just her past, but the trials that followed. Over the next days, the fortress began to heal. The curse that had lingered for centuries began to lift. Subtly at first, the air felt lighter, the walls less oppressive, the gardens more vibrant under the sun. Cale guided her through rituals designed to strengthen the wards and seal away the shadows. and in doing so they shared moments of quiet intimacy that needed no words. Elara learned more of Cale's past, the loss of his queen, the betrayals he had endured, and the loneliness that had haunted him for years. And Kale learned of her life, her fears, her resilience. They were two souls shaped by pain, yet drawn together by the possibility of renewal, of a bond deeper than fear or obligation. One evening they stood on the cliffs overlooking the river, the sun setting in a blaze of gold and crimson. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and the faint memory of the river that had once carried Elara to safety. She turned to Kale, her eyes bright with unshed tears and unspoken gratitude. "You saved me," she said softly. "No," Kale replied, his voice low, yet filled with conviction. "You saved yourself. I only gave you the chance to see it." The word struck her. He was right. She had survived not because someone protected her, but because she had refused to surrender, even when every step was fraught with danger. And now, standing beside him, she realized that her courage had been enough to challenge fate itself. The night deepened, and the fortress seemed alive with quiet magic. The shadows no longer felt threatening, but protective, as if the land itself acknowledged her triumph. And in that stillness, Kale reached for her hand. This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only trust. "Elara," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "you are no longer running. You are free." She looked at him, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. Free from fear, free from her past, and free to stand beside him as an equal. A bond formed not through possession, but through shared courage, shared pain, and shared trust. And yet, even in victory, the world reminded them of its subtle dangers. From the shadowed edges of the forest, distant but visible, movement stirred, a figure watching, patient and silent. Though the threat was not immediate, both understood that the peace they had earned was fragile, a reward hard won and easily threatened. Kale's eyes darkened slightly, and he stepped closer to Elara. "The world is not without danger," he said. "But together we are stronger than any shadow, any curse, any enemy that may come." Elara nodded, her hand finding his. The fortress, the river, the shadows, all of it was a part of her journey, shaping her, testing her, and ultimately leading her to this moment. And standing beside Kale, she felt not only safety, but belonging. Over the following weeks, they rebuilt the fortress defenses, strengthened wards, and healed old wounds, both in the land and in themselves. The curse that had lingered for generations faded further, and with it the weight of despair lifted from Kale's shoulders as well. Elara saw the man behind the Alpha, the man who carried loss, regret, and longing, and she felt a deep empathy, a connection born from shared endurance. As the final days of winter gave way to the first blooms of spring, the fortress seemed to breathe with new life. The gardens shimmered with colors long hidden under shadow. The river sparkled with silver light, and the halls echoed with the quiet hum of vitality. Elara and Kale walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, a silent affirmation of trust, respect, and unspoken affection. One morning, as the sun rose over the cliffs painting the river below in gold, Kale led Elara to the highest tower. From there they could see the kingdom sprawling beneath them, forests, rivers, and distant mountains. The weight of past darkness seemed to lift with every breath. "You have grown stronger than you know," Kale said softly, his gaze fixed on hers. "And the land has begun to heal because of your courage." Elara smiled, a small, fragile thing, but filled with genuine warmth. "I could not have done it alone," she said. "No," Kale admitted, his hand brushing hers. "You did not have to. And you never will. Together, we face the world." The fortress stood behind them, strong and steadfast, a monument not only to power but to endurance, courage, and redemption. And in that quiet golden morning, Elara realized that she had found more than safety. She had found a new beginning, a life where her strength and her spirit could flourish. The shadows still lingered at the edges of the world, quiet reminders that danger never fully vanished. But for the first time, Elara felt prepared. Not because she was fearless, but because she had learned to face fear with courage, to trust without surrender, and to stand beside someone who understood the weight of survival. Cale's hand tightened around hers. "No matter what comes," he said, his voice steady and sure, "we will endure, and together we will rise above the darkness." Pilara nodded, the fear that had once consumed her replaced by a quiet resolve. She had jumped into the river to escape, and now she had stepped into something greater, a life of courage, trust, and a bond that could withstand even the darkest shadows. The wind carried the scent of the river and the forests beyond, a promise of freedom and renewal. And for the first time in months, Alara smiled fully, not as a girl fleeing danger, but as a woman who had faced darkness and survived, who had chosen courage, and who had discovered the power of standing beside someone who saw her not as a victim, but as a force of her own making. The fortress, the river, the shadows, they were all a part of her story now. And as the sun rose higher, painting the world in light, Alara understood that her journey had led her not only to safety, but to herself.